Welcome to Searching Smarter with Selby Jennings, the podcast for hiring managers and professionals navigating the job market within financial sciences and services. Whether you're searching for top talent to grow your team or considering your own career move, this podcast will help you do so with confidence. I'm your host, Jesse Scaff, Global Client Director for Faden International's Financial Sciences and Services brand, Selby Jennings.
This week, I'm joined by Dan DeFrancesco, Deputy Editor of my favorite newsletter and the first email I open every morning, Insider Today. Dan and his team report on the issues and topics that impact the people and organizations we work with every day. I'm really excited to get Dan's perspective on the junior Wall Street talent pipeline.
It's very odd to be recruited and accept a job 2 years before you're going to start it.
Private credit and how its continued growth is disrupting lending, people moves, and candidate career aspirations. The growing popularity of data centers and how hardware is the new software when it comes to data storage, and much more. So if you're anyone that has anything to do with financial services, at least one of the topics that we discussed today will be relevant to you and your career.
I think all of these factors are leading to what could be a big thing. And why I think this will impact everyone else is...
Well, Dan, thanks for joining us again. And as I've told you offline and previously, I'm a big fan of the newsletter, a daily subscriber, daily reader of the Business Insider newsletter. So just overall, really happy to have you on.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Thanks for the support and shouting out the newsletter. I'm excited. There's a lot, I know we talked before, there's a lot of good topics to get into here and excited to get into it.
Great. Well, I want to start with a topic that I know something that you have recently reported on, but also a topic that you are passionate about and pretty knowledgeable about, which is the Wall Street talent pipeline, and specifically, the junior talent pipeline of investment banking and private equity and kind of the back and forth therein, and what this might mean for career pursuit and aspirations of those in investment banking and ancillary fields.
This is like my Mona Lisa, which is weird because I was never in banking. I never worked in investment banking, but I have this weird passion about the junior banker pipeline. And I really think what's happening now with it is going to trickle down throughout Wall Street, throughout financial services. So the big line, top line thing is I think that the investment banking analyst program is due for a change. And the reason I think that is, and I'm sure most of your listeners understand it, but just to give a quick preview, essentially how it works is you get an internship the summer before your senior year. You apply for an internship your junior year of college. You get it. You work the summer before your senior year. You work as an internship. You hopefully get a job, and then you start that job after you graduate. The weird thing is a lot of times these junior bankers, sometimes right after they start, sometimes even before they start, they're getting recruited by a private equity firm. And it's always been a little bit weird. There's always been this weird thing about how like everyone knows it's happening and they kind of allow it. Private equity all kind of works together as far as when are we going to start recruiting them. But it's very odd to be recruited and accept a job 2 years before you're going to start it. Well, this has all been kind of brewing for a while, right? And then recently, I think it was in September, Jamie Dimon, obviously JP Morgan CEO, came out and had some pretty strong words. And actually, I wanted to read the exact quote. He said, "The other thing I don't like, a lot of you work at JP Morgan and you take a job from private equity before you even start with us." And the crowd kind of reacted to that. And he said, "I think that's unethical. I don't like it. And I may eliminate it regardless of what the private equity guys say." I mean, Jamie's like a pretty, boisterous guy, but like that's a pretty strong, pointed comment.
And it's a big statement for somebody like him to say. He's pretty moderate usually in or controlled in his message. So that's a big statement from him.
And to go at like, what is a client? What is a partner? What is someone that the investment banks work hand in hand with a lot in the private equity ecosystem? So he says that, right? That's kind of number one reason why I think like something's got to get here. I think the other thing you're seeing is, and this has been reported, is with the rise of AI, you're seeing a lot of the work that junior bankers are doing can now be supplemented by AI. And even some banks have come out either, or reports have come out about some banks diminishing their junior banker analyst class. So now you have the banks don't like the fact that you're going to a bank only to go jump and work at private equity. The size of the classes are also kind of reducing. And then I think just in general, the concept of someone going to work somewhere only to kind of pop over, like, yes, that was initially the kind of the framework. But I think just, especially we see with Gen Z, they're just so willing to change how the traditional corporate framework is gone. I wonder if they're going to continue to accept this idea of, oh, I have to go work in an investment bank to then go work on the buy side or then go get my MBA, or, that's this natural progression. So I think all of these factors are leading to what could be a big thing. And I'm rambling here on my diatribe, but lastly, why I think this will impact everyone else is because this has kind of been the foot in the door for a lot of people to get on Wall Street. So if that changes, all of a sudden now the buy side has to go and recruit from the junior level, hedge funds, everyone, pick your litter of who typically pulls from the junior banker analyst class. They're going to now have to spin up their own recruiting efforts, and it's just going to change things in a way that Wall Street hasn't been shook up for a while. So that's my my Pepe Sylvia, big theory.
We're getting right into it. They say hard-hitting questions. We don't even have a question. This is just straight into hard-hitting topic, which I really like, because it could, like you say, it could totally upend what graduate level and analyst level recruitment looks like. Never mind just recruiting itself, the movement of talent throughout the financial services industry. Do you foresee that there is a particular outcome, maybe an inevitability to this? You mentioned the way buy-side firms or private equity companies might have to approach their talent. Do you think there's kind of like an inevitability of like what is going to happen, whether it's the end of the analyst cycle program, right? That year thing or something like that? Or do you think this is kind of in nascent stages and we're very much in a wait and see mode to see how the market reacts to something like, Jamie Dimon's comment, or something more along the lines of this could be the end of, the return offer type of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the buy side's been sniffing around pulling straight from college for the past few years, right? Mm-hmm. And they haven't been too vocal about it, but we've written some stories about these kind of PM programs, like junior PM programs, like you get in the door and we train you up and eventually we want you to become PM at a hedge fund or whatnot. Yes. So yes. I think that's going to continue to kind of boil over. Whether there's like an eventual tipping point, we'll see. I don't know how that would look, because eventually, right, if the, it's not like the banks can, like Jamie says, oh, I'm going to, I don't want you going after the people that are working for me. But then if they're just going to go around them and go straight, there's nothing that Jamie or anyone else can do at the investment banks. I mean, you would know this better than me, but with the amount of people that eventually want to get out of banking, to get onto the buy side or get onto the other side, I don't see them winning that war and being like, if you go work for, you're never going to be able to come back. Like, everyone eventually wants to get there. So if they can skip that step anyway, then I think eventually it's going to tip. But it will be a matter of like, as the buy side continues to spin up their programs, it's going to be, oh, well, if they're doing it, then we have to do it. And then, I think, so yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if, within the next decade, there are full on big junior analyst type programs at a lot of the buy side firms that typically just pulled straight from investment banks.
That seems like a very viable possible option, and kind of an advent of a new talent attraction system, if you will, for firms, whereas traditionally it's been pretty linear. So I agree. To kind of weave in a different topic related though, you mentioned how this, the advent of AI as well, separately, it's kind of going after a lot of the more junior or entry level, or I guess lower responsibility type of jobs. Do you think that there's any overlap in that? Whereas, these junior or analyst candidates, their roles might even be fewer or eliminated because of AI or anything like that? Or do you think, those roles are still safe? It's more just that the candidates themselves may have a different path into private equity, the buy side, and what have you?
I definitely think some of them are at risk. I think there's been, there's only been some reporting around how some of these banks are rethinking the size of their analyst classes because of AI. You know what the running joke is always, right? If you're a junior banker, it's you get the please fix email at 5:00, right when you want to start to wind down about fixing commas or changing the size. Like, that's all type of stuff that I think AI can eventually, or already is doing. And I think that is definitely going to start to creep up more and more. And I know this is something else we want to talk about. Maybe we could transition to it now. I think what's going to be interesting, and this is not just for banks, this is for anyone in financial services, is deciding kind of where the line of where you want the AI to go, as far as, and then where you want the human to go. Because I think that is something, as the AI tools become better and better, but obviously there are still plenty of quirks about them, or things you need to keep an eye out about something. Understanding, when do we want the machine to go and when do we want the human to go? And how do we kind of find that natural point where we can kind of step in?
Yes. And a lot has been said, probably in a Business Insider article, to be honest. I think Marco Argenti from Goldman Sachs has talked a lot about how they as a firm are going to be investing in the responsibility that AI will take on. And like you say, right, it could range from anything from the please fix and take kind of the man hours out of presentations, but also the LLM suites that all of these big banks are founding and incorporating is just kind of automating and optimizing the human, the human capability. So yeah, I think it's something that 2025, 26 MBA grads or fresh grads, like you say, those who have investment banking or private equity aspirations are going to have to just navigate, right? As they're pursuing their entry level careers, or maybe their return careers, if they're coming from an MBA after some work in the industry already, they're going to have to navigate this the way other previous candidates in banking or the buy side or what have you have not previously navigated at all.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because when you think about when you start your career on Wall Street, you don't have the connections, right? You don't have the sourcing as far as like to get actual deals when you're super young, like an MD would, to like know the person from the golf course or whatever that we can kind of start talking through, helping you work through a transaction or debt or whatever. So the way you kind of earn your keep, so to speak, is kind of grinding it out with the pitch decks, all those things, all that other stuff. But if all that other stuff is taken up by AI, then how do you kind of get your feet under you? How do you kind of make yourself known?
Right.
It's going to be really interesting to watch.
Yes. And another market to potentially watch this in, and another topic that I know that you've been covering a lot recently, is private credit. So maybe not necessarily as much on the entry-level talent spectrum as much as it is the amount of market share that it seems private credit seems to be taking these days and where their investments are going. Tell me what your thoughts are just generally in the private credit market and what you think this means for kind of the pie slice of finance, if you will.
Yeah, really interesting space, was kind of the topic du jour, all of last year and then certainly into this year. We had a story about a year ago. I was just looking through our archives, kind of mentioning that it was basically the hottest job on Wall Street. It was like trying to get into private credit in one way or another. So I think a couple of things, right? On the one, if you want to look on the good side, I think, right, more competition is always good, just generally speaking, right? It's always good to have more players in the space. It makes everyone kind of up their game up. I think also new ways to get liquidity, right? Because of some of the regulations around banks, their balance sheet limitations, right? Being able to offer an alternative line of credit and in a separate way than they traditionally had to go to, anyone that needs money, like financing. I think that is also great. And then obviously, like you're talking about, the new job opportunity, right? All that is I think unquestionably good for the street. I think where you're seeing some people raise the red flag, right, is the first thing is transparency, right? There's banks are very transparent about what is on their books and the type of lending that they do. And they've done this for hundreds and hundreds of years. Private credit,
they have to be,
not so much. Yeah, because they have to be. Private credit, not so much. That's the double-edged sword of private credit, right? The benefit is that they don't have to be as transparent. And that gets back to kind of that alternative type of financing that people can go to them for. But the downside is you don't know, kind of who is lending to who, and this kind of, not to make a giant leap, but like, if you think about the financial crisis of 08, right? That was the big thing. It was nobody knew all the different swaps, all the different derivatives that they had. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're holding this and I'm holding this. And now I'm, on the hook for however many billions of dollars and we're in trouble. So not suggesting that is necessarily going to be the case. Some people have kind of called like, it's going to be this huge crisis. I'm not saying going that far, but that's kind of what's at risk here. And then to that other point, because this has gotten so hot, it's a lot of flooding in the market and a lot of people coming in that maybe don't have the experience to lend, but say, hey, look, this is really hot. Rates are up. The banks can't offer as good a rates as they normally could. Why can't we step in and make a couple bucks? So I think it's a really interesting dynamic of there's a lot of pros and benefits to Wall Street from private credit continuing to grow, but there are undoubtedly some risks. And
similarly on the hedge fund side, right? There was 5 to 10 years ago, as I guess, Silicon Valley 2.0, when it seems there were new startups offering various types of services and products every day, there was an element of, taking a risk as a candidate as well. And the opportunity to go do something sure, maybe a little bit less stable, but the opportunity was to take more risks and have a little bit more autonomy and freedom in an industry, right? But still within financial services. The hedge funds still offer that a little bit, less regulation, famously, right? Or notoriously, depending on what side you're on. It seems like private credit could offer that as well, right? The less red tape, the opportunity to take more risks and have a little bit more financial autonomy, as obviously funding is seemingly through the roof, regardless of whatever industry you're in. So
I have a question for you. We'll spin it on you here. As you should. From a from a talent perspective, from a recruitment perspective, how do you view adding something like that on the resume and maybe it not working out? Like, do you think, is there something to be said for, going to work at maybe a private credit firm and it doesn't necessarily work out? And I know I'm being very broad and vague in terms. Can that be like a knock on you or be viewed almost as like a red flag? Or is it, look, getting that varied experience is always going to, big picture, help you? Now, I understand there's, if you go to work in a private credit firm and there's something massive criminally that happens there, that's a different story. But just saying like you get into the space and it doesn't work out, is that going to be viewed better or worse for you as a candidate? If there's people who are listening who are considering like, should I make the jump into this hot area?
I actually really like that question. And I don't think it's specific to private credit. In fact, I think it's relevant to hedge funds and was relevant to the fintech space and is still relevant there or anything like that, right? As long as you're not like completely changing lanes into something like totally outside of finance. So I have a few takes on it, right? One, I would say, no, I don't think it's a knock on a candidate's resume, full stop. That's because the opportunities and the learning opportunities are always going to be there, right? You're going to get a different perspective into how financial markets work. You're going to get different perspective in the day-to-day and the operation that is, if nothing else, a learning opportunity, right? That said, where these top-tier firms, right, whether you're banks, hedge funds, or other private credit organizations, top-tier firms really care about individual performance. So if you're taking a huge leap and it turns out that like you might not be ready for that type of autonomy or risk taking, right? Financial risk taking, if you're owning a revenue generating type of decision, that could potentially, be a harmful, knock on a resume, right? You don't want to be asked in an interview, so why did you leave? Well, I was actually one of the 5 to 10%, bottom 5 to 10% at my firm, and now I'm back on the market, right? So I would say, actually, there are instances where we will have offers for candidates, regardless of the industry that they're currently in. If they're pursuing something else, we can say, look, you should consider this role because of what it will do for your long-term career, right? You can always come back to X, Y, or Z, depending on which jump you're making, right? You can always come back to that, but adding something like a strong private credit name to your resume where you can learn and you can grow and you can deal with different clients, different types of clients and stakeholders, that to me is nothing but a learning curve, a positive learning curve. But you just want to make sure that you're at the right time in your career to be able to do so that you're not, kind of harming your resume as this was a huge mistake. It was way over my head, right? Does that make sense?
Totally. And I think it's something that's top of mind for everyone across financial services, because you see these trends pop up and there's always going to be opportunities in these spaces because firms are starting to build out different developments. And on one hand, it's like, yeah, it's interesting, but it's like, oh, if that falls flat, how it's going to be. But you make a lot of good points about like, look, you're going to get that experience. It's going to kind of round you out more as a candidate. And I remember speaking to a source once years ago, and it's like, we respect someone going out there and trying it and having the willingness to kind of bet on themselves. To your point, there's limits to it. You don't want to end up being, the bottom 5% if that's going to knock you down. But, there's mostly no harm in going out there and getting those different experiences for sure.
I agree. And there are, the same way there are university feeder programs to certain institutions, there are feeder institutions to other verticals or other institutions, right? I think it's no secret that Goldman Sachs is so good that famously they are a poaching ground for the world's leading multi-strat asset managers, right? So to tie this into the first topic, right? Investment banking, early careers, and analysts are feeding ground for private equity, right? Who knows if the private credit space grows there might be the private credit, whereas now is kind of like the destination. Private credit could soon become the feeding ground for the next private equity wave, or back to the hedge funds, something like that. There's all kinds of different cyclicalities that could come of this, all just kind of feeding into the talent within financial services being better because the bar is being raised, and different sectors are always pulling from different skills. So
sure, yeah, absolutely.
My general thoughts on that. Thanks for that question. I guess I there's another podcast that I listen to by Adam Grant, and at the end he always says, "I get that this is my show, but do you have questions for me?" I always get told I ask too many questions. So thank you for doing that. In fact, if you have more questions as we go on, please ask them. So thank you for asking the question.
The benefits of bringing a reporter on is it's naturally they're just going to start turning the tables on you.
Yes. We're going to get to a point where we're just answering questions with more questions and getting really philosophical, really deep.
I love it.
So I know, kind of like rounding out, your big three of topics that you're, we'll call it, passionate about, or have been hot topics that Business Insider's been reporting on for quite a while, and in depth this year. And that last one is data centers. And again, to use the word, like the advent of data centers and how big tech, they're taking over big tech, the physical space that is required, the investment in talent that is required. So tell me what that has meant for to you, and how you've reported on it, whether it's the investment in the infrastructure themselves, the potential for M&A activity, or, like you say, the talent to support this trend.
Yeah, I just think in a lot of ways, kind of what was private credit last year feels like what is infrastructure and, data centers, and utilities even. I kind of bundle them all together, but the way you think about it is like, first you got to have the electricity that's going to power the data centers that then ultimately powers the AI. So, big picture, it's a bet on AI. It's part of the whole AI trade. Like, if we're going to go all in on generative AI and it's going to be as big as everyone, says it is, they're going to need these massive data centers. And, you're seeing some massive players. I think most notably Blackstone has been, really touting all of its big time, data center bets. So it's just really fascinating to me because it is, for so long, it was software, right? Software eats the world, software. And now this is a very hardware-focused thing, right? It's like these big physical warehouses. So I think that in and of itself is interesting. And then I think also understanding the talent around the space as they look to get this, who are they bringing in to hire? And I think we talked about this before. Maybe I was talking about it with someone else. But like in the same way that you see biopharmaceutical companies, they bring in doctors, right? Because they need that subject matter experts. Are there these subject matter experts on data centers, on utilities? All of a sudden, these financial services firms, whether it's they're advising people or these tech firms that actually have these data centers, that they're going to have to bring them in. That years ago they weren't doing this. I just think it's a really fascinating area. And again, like to bring it back to the beginning, I think in the same way that private credit was like talked about and really excited and everyone was very keen on it, that's what's starting to feel like infrastructure talk, whether it's the data centers or utility side of things.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's some kind of news about some huge company making an investment or physically building one, right? As you mentioned, Blackstone is all about it literally every day. Amazon, Microsoft, right? All NVIDIA, right? All building these huge data centers. Obviously, NVIDIA not in the US physically yet, but taking up, not to get too off track, but like taking up the physical space in these rural towns or smaller suburban parts of America. And yeah, to plug actually a different fade and brand here, our LVI brand that covers energy and infrastructure, we actually recruit for the individuals who are building and hardwiring these data centers, right? But our financial services, Selby Jennings brand, and the technology team, our infrastructure technology team specifically, is actually covering the tech support of those data centers. And what's interesting to me, as I was actually doing a little bit of research on this for today and talking to our team here, our infrastructure tech team here, to understand kind of who they're working with and how much we're supporting the data center space right now, it's actually quite prevalent. And not only that, it's not just like at your massive, Amazons or Microsoft, like you say, these are high frequency trading firms. These are hedge funds. These are prop trading firms that are building data centers specifically, like you say, for the use of AI, right? And that's from everything from the wiring and technician, right? Data center technician type of role, to using AI in data science for cooling the data centers, right? Because there's so much electricity being used that they have to make sure they don't overheat, but also data center engineers and data center architects, right? And these are everywhere from New York, the Carolinas, Texas. This is all over the country. So long-winded way of saying we're seeing it here internally as well, and a lot of our clients that maybe aren't making news or aren't as globally enormous, even in brand or in headcount as a Blackstone or a Microsoft, but it's pretty ubiquitous within finance.
Yeah, and you make a really good point with the HFTs and stuff, and the hedge funds, the market makers of the world. Like, it kind of brings me back to like the whole Flash Boys discourse, right, from like 10 years ago, where in New Jersey and out in Chicago,
Yes.
you have to build out the thing to be as close as possible to get, and that's a microcosm of this, right? That was very small as far as compared to what these massive centers need to be. But it is interesting. Like, I wonder, and I don't know if you know this, or maybe this is something to look into down the road for us, as far as like if some of these HFT firms are leveraging some of the experiences they got from going through that whole low latency trading kind of error that was so big 10 years ago, that now is like in a roundabout way coming back in vogue in a different way with the data centers. Again, not apples to apples per se, but it still gets back to that focus on hardware and the wiring and all the data engineering, the stuff that, we talk about that you wouldn't necessarily think of when you think of maybe financial services.
You make such a good point that I want to touch on really quickly. And actually, this is something that, our guy said to me earlier today, right? You said it was all about software. Yet these data centers are quite literally hardware. And, you said low latency, right? And we're talking about high frequency. So they almost seem, at least to me, right, not a technologist and not a former tech recruiter. My background was in risk management, but building data centers to ensure that they are the fastest to trade. Whereas kind of like the preconception, as this was becoming a big thing in the AI and programming is all software, like you say. Mm-hmm. So now there are warehouses to make sure that financial services firms are being the fastest to trade. Right? Mm-hmm. Kind of flips it on its head a little bit, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that I asked our guys earlier was, well, this obviously doesn't mean that they don't have to stop programming. So, what do those skill sets look like? And they said, it's still programming heavy. There are programs such as Bash and Python that are still, data center heavy type of languages. But it's not just program and be done. There's a marriage between the programming and the systems administration, the hardwiring, and all that. So I found it to be really interesting.
Yeah, and it's also just your head zigs back and forth from like years ago it was you have to go to school and learn programming, and everyone needs to learn programming languages. And now it's like you really want to get in, like, learn how to like do the hardwiring and stuff like that, or learn how to like help design chips or help manufacture chips. Like, that's the way to, have the best career. So I don't know. I have a 2.5-year-old. I have no idea what I'm going to talk. Maybe I should hedge and say programming, because by the time she's in college, it's going to swing back around. Who knows?
Yes. So interesting. And this is a really great topic because it's something that you wouldn't necessarily associate with financial services. So I'm really glad that you brought it up earlier for us to talk about, because, there's obviously the traditional topics, and even, the AI being one of the more, present topics to talk about all the time. But data warehouses are not just for tech companies, and they're not just for project managing, energy and infrastructure either. This is infrastructure feeding financial services in a different way than we're used to. So I'm really glad you brought that up. So thank you. Pivot here. I think we're probably getting a little bit closer to the end, but just to get, again, I guess a little bit more macro regarding financial services. We're recording this episode late October, so Q3 earnings have just been reported at all of the major banks, and obviously, have gotten all my statistical updates and the feedback. through the articles on Business Insider, as I've mentioned. What's your general take, right? Obviously, we have an upcoming election, so no fallout or repercussions from that yet. But what's your general take on the recent earnings reports from especially U.S. investment banks, and what that might mean, kind of in concert with the lowering of interest rates, the future of the M&A market, right? Do you think we're kind of turning a corner? I hate to wax on the whole soft landing versus recession piece, but I just want to get your take as somebody who kind of sees financial services from a different lens, but very macro the way I do. I would just want to know what your take is on that.
Yeah. So all the big banks, the U.S. banks earnings were great, right? Beat estimates. I'm pretty sure all of them beat estimates. So that was great for them, because there was some kind of question about whether it might be a little bit dicey. I think there was some kind of foreshadowing that some people thought it was a little bit touch and go there, but all of them reported really strong. The big takeaway we found from the call and from the numbers was, it seems like M&A, which is kind of the boy who cried. It's felt like the boy who's cried wolf, because banks have called, the M&A market's coming back, IPO market's coming back. But it does genuinely feel like that's the case. We're talking now before the November decision by the Fed. I think the projections still are that it'll be a quarter point cut, but regardless of what that is, even if they don't cut, which I don't think would, according to the numbers, wouldn't be likely. But either way, it feels like the Fed is going to start to continue to ease the policy, which will help the M&A market. There's a big, David Solomon talked about on the investor call how there's a big, pipeline of deals. Clients are very excited to kind of get this deal going. And, I know we talked about junior bankers up top, not to harp on the M&A market, but obviously it's a trickle down effect, right? Once the deal market opens up, companies can start making acquisitions. That means, we're going to go into a new growth area. We're going to get out of an area. That means there's going to be a lot more, from a talent perspective, a lot more movement from people. So, overall, it does feel like a little bit of, getting out of maybe some of the I hesitate to say maybe some of the volatility we've had for the past few years, and maybe getting into more of a return to the normal traditional M&A market. Again, it might be a little bit rocky at first, because there's been such a backup that there'll be a flood to kind of get stuff out the door. But yeah, it feels like maybe we're going to, the deals market will start to open up again, which will open up kind of everything else, down the ecosystem, so to speak.
Yeah. And honestly, after the last, let's call it 5 years of pendulum swinging, right, seemingly from extremes of, nothing in COVID to post-COVID freedoms, back to, actually, that might have been a little bit too much, 2023, 24, let's be a little bit more fiscally conservative, and all of that. So I'm almost encouraged by the fact that you think that the chance for a return to just the general cyclicality might be back for 2025. And I was, I've been thinking about that. We've been having a lot of conversations about that. And it seems that obviously, the M&A markets of financial services drive really the entire market itself, right? M&A activity and advisory revenues drive, all of the financial services industry. But from our perspective, what that means is how these organizations then respond to their talent plans, right? So for us, if the pendulum is swinging back to a little bit of normalcy, if M&A activities return to just kind of pre-COVID, cyclical norms, that means we might be able to expect a generally, traditional recruitment year, which was probably the 10 years leading up to COVID, where there's more or less a finite, 7 to 8 month period. And for candidates, what that means is post-bonus payouts that coincides with organizations kind of finalizing or announcing or starting to activate their hiring plans for the year. And therefore, it's probably a good time to think about making a move, if you've been thinking about it, come the beginning of 2025, if everything you and I are saying actually comes to fruition. And if only we had our magic 8-ball or crystal ball to know the answer. But I tend to agree with you, and I'm optimistic that, that kind of return to normalcy might be the case.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I think after bonus season, I think we will start to see that. We've written a lot about this. We call it the, stuck in place economy, where, it's not that, unemployment's still relatively low, but we're not seeing a lot of job movement. And it's kind of because everyone just kind of like, well, the economy's okay. It's not great. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. So I guess I'm just going to stick it out. And companies are feeling the same way. Now that we've kind of, again, knock on wood, it seems gotten through the recession risk and seems like we've steered clear of the actual hard landing, whether it's going to be a soft landing or a no landing. All of that points towards companies being a little bit more aggressive with their hiring plans, their growth plans. And as a result, employees being a little bit more open or candidates being a little bit more open to go out and find new jobs. But I mean, for you, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this, is I wonder, though, what will be the perspective of candidates entering back into the job market? Because, obviously, and you know this better than anybody, 2021, it was a free for all, right? Like as far as the job market, if you wanted to move, like you said jump and employers said how high, it was insane.
The glory days. Filling roles in our sleep.
Exactly. So you go from that then to just the complete opposite. People are getting laid off. The job market's extremely hard.
Yeah,
and
really
now,
low attrition.
Yeah, and now I personally worry, and you could say this about a lot of things. Like you say this about the house market there's this expectation of, oh, we're going to go back to 2021, like where I can say jump and they're going to say how high. It's like things are going to get better. There's going to be hiring, but it's not going to ever be like that in the same way that you're probably never going to be able to buy a house with a 3% mortgage. Like it's just, that was then and that will always be then. And this is not now, but you are closer to this than I can be. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And again, thank you for the question. My thoughts are, I think, and we actually did a previous episode about like how far has the pendulum swung in the year of 2024, right? And do we think was 2023 the extreme? Is this the extreme? Was 2021, 22 the extreme on the other side? I'm with you. I don't think 2021 and 2022 is normal, right? As I just alluded to, my version of a soft landing, recession aside, my version of a recruitment soft landing would be the predictability of 2016, 17, 18, right? Where you kind of had a general idea. Our clients were comfortable knowing what their volumes were going to be, comfortable knowing when they went to agencies, comfortable knowing what the attrition might be and having it be enough that candidates are making enough moves to be able to, replace their talent and upskill their talent, but also grow, right? A lot of what we're hearing right now and experiencing is attrition rates are so low that the talent movement is like minuscule on the growth spectrum, and even less so on the attrition spectrum, right? So to me, in short, to answer your question, yes, I don't think we're going to return to 2021, 22. That wasn't normal to me. But for candidates who might be looking to either to get back into the job market or back into employment, I think if you were around, try to think back to, just like what being employed or what looking for a job was, pre-COVID, and that would be kind of a comfortable place for everybody in the talent industry within financial services.
Yeah, I hope for your sanity they do that. And I don't know worrying about the Gen Zs though. That came out, like if you came into the job market, if your first job was 2021, then
nothing's been normal. You graduated during a pandemic, jumping how high. Now nobody can go anywhere.
Right.
Might be a rude awakening for them.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of us millennials. Like we came out after the financial crisis and very different feelings. So I don't know. Well, we'll see. It'll be an interesting year, if nothing else.
For sure. Like I say, if only we had our crystal ball. So I guess it's wait and see yet again. But that's why we keep showing up. Otherwise, it'd be boring.
Yeah. Very true. Very true.
So to close things out, I want to get to our underhyped or overhyped segment. Want your take on this, Dan? Underhyped or overhyped? The talent pipeline for analyst, investment bankers, or entry-level financial services candidates will look different in the next couple years than it does now.
you're going to be shocked, right? If I didn't, forecast this enough. I think it's massively underhyped. And I know we talked about it a lot, but I'll give one more piece to the puzzle that maybe some of your listeners who haven't cared as much about will care. This is going to impact the senior folks. And it's going to impact the senior folks because with all this upheaval we talked about at the beginning of the episode, that's going to be more work is eventually going to fall to the senior people. And if you don't believe that's the case, I can tell you it is because we've seen it before. Way back when I first was kind of knee deep in this space, we were covering the banker burnout of like 2021 that was going on. And as that was happening, as the deals were going crazy, and as there was a limited amount of junior bankers, the VPs had to kind of come down the pipeline and help out with a lot of the grunt work that they normally didn't have to do. So I think it's underhyped what's going to happen to this pipeline. And I think people that are like, well, I'm not a junior banker, it doesn't impact me. It is going to impact you because with them moving or them going different spots, that means the more senior people are going to have to do more work. So be careful about your Hamptons house this summer because you might have a lot more work to do.
That's a great angle. I love that twist, and especially since we didn't get to it earlier. Not to mention, we're not going to restart the whole episode here, but that could then lead into what is the AI effect, on those talent cycles that then leads to those responsibilities and added workloads for the more senior people. So that's a great answer. I love it. Thank you. Close out with two more easy, fun questions. What's a book that you're reading right now? And what is a podcast other than Searching Smarter, of course? What's a podcast that you're listening to?
Of course. So yeah, with podcasts, I'll admit I'm not much of a finance type podcast person. I like the Ryan Russillo show, like the Rewatchables. Those are great. If you don't know, I'm checking out sports movies. But I'll flip it on you. I love the show Industry. I think it just finished its third season. If you're not familiar, it's on HBO. It's incredible. I know people like Billions. I know people like Succession. For me, I think it's the best representation of Wall Street. It's don't let your kids watch it. It's a little bit adult, but it's great. If you need a summary, if you're familiar with the show Euphoria, if you're familiar with the show Succession, imagine those two shows combined. Young people working on Wall Street in London. Highly recommend on the trading floor. Great stuff.
Awesome.
And then for the book, for the book.
That's a recommendation I'm going to take, by the way. I'm going to start Industry.
Please do. I think it's great. Great soundtrack too. And then for the book, my wife just got me The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. If you don't know who Rick Rubin is, famous music producer, worked with the Beastie Boys from New York. He's the guy that kind of looks like Santa Claus, got the big white beard. He wrote a book, Creative Act, very different, not like his autobiography by any means. He just talks about how to be a creative person. You don't necessarily have to be in a quote unquote creative role to read this book. He kind of speaks to anything and any job you do. It's a really interesting read to rethink your approach to whatever you do and how there is a creative process in that, whether it's trading, whether it's recruiting, whether it's writing a newsletter, whatever you might do, I think you can find some value in it. So highly recommend.
I'm a big fan of those types of books by those types of people, right? Whether it's Shoe Dog or Losing My Virginity by Richard Branson. Like those are just great reads that I think actually do end up having a little bit of a self-help as much as they are, the biopic or biography, autobiographical type of angle. And something I always tell my team, right? If you're not learning, I'm not doing my job. And if you're not thinking creatively, you're not doing yours, right? So any way to think about things differently, my perspective is just one perspective. So go read a book and learn something, go ask a question from somebody else, figure out what they have to say about something. So all good stuff. Loved everything. Thanks for all the insights, all the content today, Dan. I think there was some really useful stuff on a wide variety of topics that hopefully the listeners will find pretty useful. So thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is great. I had a blast. This is a lot of fun, so really appreciate it.
That's all for today's episode of Searching Smarter. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until next time, keep searching smarter.